George Gibson comes from Knott County, Kentucky. He was born at Bath, a small rural post office there. He was born in 1938, but he had started learning music in the 1950s. And he's done a lot of research on the banjo in southeast Kentucky and the music there. And my favorite thing that he says is, as far as I know, I'm the last person left playing the old Burgess Creek banjo music. I'm the last possum up the tree. So here's Mr. George Gibson.
I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. Hey, that'll be my home. That'll be my home. All I drink is the tears I shed. All I drink is the tears I shed. For I never expect to see you anymore. All I eat is green willow shoots. All I eat is green willow shoots. And I never expect to see you anymore. I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. Hey, that'll be my home. That'll be my home. Stop and tell my mama howdy. Stop and tell my mama howdy. For I never expect to see her anymore. Stop and feed my baby candy. Stop and feed my baby candy. For I never expect to see it anymore. I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. I'm gonna cross that cold icy mountain. Hey, that'll be my home. That'll be my home. That song is quite old. It was turned at one time into a Civil War song, but it predates the Civil War. It goes back to the days when people were going across some strange mountain to unknown lands to maybe hunt, trap, or clear up some land for bringing their family over later. Sometimes it's versions with across the Blue Ridge Mountains and whatnot. This is a Knott County version. I took morphine last Saturday night. Lord, I took it in a morphine well. If the doctor hadn't come just as he did, Lord, I'd been in my grave today. Well, it's Beecher's Sunday, my rock and roll. Oh, baby, let me tell you my dream. I dreamed last night, had a pocket full of money and a quarter in a big dustbin. But when I woke, it was on a joke. Lord, I didn't have a penny to my name. There's Beecher's Sunday, rock and roll. Oh, baby, I will love you till the day I die. Well, it's 15 cents. That's all I've got, and $1 is all I pray. Well, it's 15 cents off of morphine. Will lay me in my lonesome grave. That's a Knott County tune. I never heard it outside of Knott County or saw it in print. Most of the banjo players around Knott County played it and sang it, including Banjo Bill Cornett, in different versions, actually. I learned this mostly from a neighbor named James Sloan. I think I heard Melvin Amberger play it once, and his version was slightly different, actually. But I call these type of tunes co-camp songs because they came in or were created in the days when the railroads and the coal camps were being built. I went out last Friday evening, just walking all around, when I met up with that Wild Bill Jones. He was walking, he was talking with my little Donnie Bell, and I begged him for to leave her alone. They say that love is pleasure, Lord, no pleasure do I see. For the gal that I love as dear as my life has now turned her back on me. Well, I got mixed up in an awful fight, and I fell into the county jail. And the saddest words that ever I heard was when she wouldn't come and go my bill. She wrote me back in a week or so, saying, darling, do come home sometime. Well, it's $1 in my pocketbook and a 44 in my hand. I'm gonna go get the gal that I love, or I'm gonna go get her man. They say my age is 22, too old to be controlled. I drew my revolver all from my side and destroyed that poor boy's soul. Well, he rambled and he scrambled all over the ground, and he gave one dying groan. He threw his arms up around her neck, saying, darling, you are left alone. They say that love is pleasure, Lord, no pleasure do I see. For today was the last of that Wild Bill Jones, and tomorrow be the last of me. I believe Morphine was one of the first tunes I learned on the banjo. Probably Wild Bill Jones was a close second, but I learned an entirely different version. This version came from a lady named Addie Graham. She grew up in Wolfe County, and she was a girl around 1900, 1910. And a black banjo player named Grant Reed would come down the road playing the banjo. Her father forbade anyone dancing, but she would step out behind the barn and dance while Grant Reed was playing that banjo. And she said he was the best banjo player she ever heard. And I think this version might have come from him. Newspaper reporters say he was a professional banjo player. I think he might have played in one of the resorts that was in Wolfe County at that time. I think one of them hired people who could play music. Thought I'd give you a little bit of a dance music lick there. I'm going to play you one of the first tunes I learned on the banjo. There's always been borrowing between commercial music and music of the people, between the stage and the people. This is a fairly modern song. I don't know how it got in Knott County. I think it came from a black banjo player. But I found a lady who had played dulcimer going into the 40s, which was unusual because the dulcimer was disappearing in the teens. I had a neighbor whose father had played dulcimer. He said he'd rather hear an old sow scratch her rear end on a briar than hear dulcimer. I thought that was rather interesting. But I visited this lady's daughter, and she had her mother's dulcimer. And I just happened to ask, what was your mother's favorite tune? She said, Black Bottom Blues. I was sort of floored. But, people get the impression that ladies sat around with the dulcimer and played these old ballads. That was not a fact. They played the local tunes, the tunes that were available, and did play some ballads. Well, I went down in Black Bottom just to get a little booze. Well, I woke up in the jailhouse wearing them big brogan shoes. Oh, sweet mama, Daddy's got them black bottom blues. When you go down in Black Bottom, put your money in your shoes. 'Cause those women in Black Bottom, they will give you those black bottom blues. Oh, sweet mama, Daddy's got them black bottom blues. When you go down in Black Bottom, just to have a little fun, have your $15 ready when that policeman makes his run. Oh, sweet mama, Daddy's got them black bottom blues. When you go down in Black Bottom, put your money in your pants. 'Cause those women in Black Bottom, they won't give a man a chance. Oh, sweet mama, Daddy's got them black bottom blues. When you go down in Black Bottom, put your money in your socks. 'Cause those women down in Black Bottom, they will throw you on the rocks. Oh, sweet mama, Daddy's got them black bottom blues. tried to figure out where this came from. I asked my dad's first cousin who was the first person he heard play it. He said, well, Wallace Stamper played it. He lived in the head of a car, and he played it on a banjo without a fretboard. It was a fretless banjo, of course. People made their own, and, they didn't put frets on them. He said that man was so bowed over, if he took a run-and-go at your house, he'd have run under the porch. But I had another fellow told me he heard a black banjo playing it over across the hill from where I live. And there was a black banjo player over there. Was probably the best in the county for years and years. I never had the chance to hear him play. Did learn a song about him when I was a boy. I didn't know he was black or that he was a banjo player. He had killed his wife, and they'd written a song about it. They sang it around. I learned it a long time ago. The fellow's grandson's a friend of mine. See, I think I'll swap banjos here for a while. This tuning is sort of a way off from the one I was in, so it's easier to do. We're down in southern Texas, where I rejoined to stay. I left my cattle parents when their hair was turning gray. I joined them dying cowboys. I knew I had to ride. I lay my foot all in the stirrup and bid it this world goodbye. I heard them Indians coming. I heard them give their yell. My feelings at that moment, boys, no human tongue can tell. My horse, she got excited. She would not stand still. The firelight from her pistols, boys, like sunshine on the hill. Our captain came close beside me, and he gave me good advice. He told me how to surrender and try to save my life. My buddy shot dead beside me, tears falling from my face. Oh, how I love you, buddy, but I can't take your place. And then I thought of mother, who said in tears to me, to you they are a stranger, at home you better be. I thought her old and childish, the best she did not know. My mind was well rounded, so westward I did go. Way down in southern Texas, where I rejoined to stay. I left my cowboy parents when their hair was turning gray. That's Knott County song. I never heard it outside of Knott County. I learned it from Grand Hudson, who was born in 1911. He never played a dance tune. He didn't have to. His mother played for dances in their home, which was quite common. There were more women playing banjo going back as far as I can in oral history than there were men, actually. But the first time I met him, I was picking on a little tune. He said, "Son, if you can't sing it, don't pick it." Because he sang with everything. And I think he said he had a cousin named Gabe Hudson. His name was Grand Hudson. that had gone west. He might have made this song up or picked it up out west. A lot of people went west and come back, and a lot of people went west and stayed. I usually play 12 or 15 or more tunings, so it's hard to me not to retune. So I used to bring several banjos on stage, but I find it's just as easy to retune a little bit. I tried using one of those tuners once in a while, but they confused me. Way down on Old Smoky, where it's covered in snow, I lost my lover from a courting too slow. It's raining and it's hailing, the moon gets no light, my horses they can't travel this dark stormy night. Oh, put up your horses and feed them some hay. Come sit here beside me for as long as you stay. My horses ain't hungry, they won't eat your hay. I'll ride down to Georgia and write you my mind. I'll ride down to Georgia and write you my mind to Mr. Mary and leave you behind. Now courting is a pleasure, but a parting is grief. But a false-hearted true love is worse than a thief. A thief cannot rob you and take what you hate, but a false-hearted true love will lead you to the grave. Thank you. I have an interesting little story to go with that tune. There was a gentleman on the creek who had played banjo but had ceased playing, but he could sing a verse or two to a song. He sang a couple verses to this song. I asked my mother if she heard it when she was a girl. She said yes. She gave me 2 or 3 verses, so I sort of put them all together and played it for my mother and for this gentleman on the creek. They said it was pretty well right. Then around 62 or 63, I had a neighbor who was in school, I believe at UK, said he needed a song or two for a project he was working on. And I found out later that song is a Kentucky folklore record for, I believe it's January, March of 63. My neighbor's name was Don Amberg. He became a librarian. But I've seen it in print since, and it was printed exactly like I put it together. I don't know whether it's that way originally or not, but that's what I came up with and what I could gather. My problem was finding the words to the songs because most of the banjo players hadn't played in 10 or 15 years. It was common for an old-time banjo player not to have a banjo. Well, my father had a country grocery store, and he'd stop by once in a while. I'd get somebody to play a tune. Then I'd start looking for verses to the tunes. What hills, my true love, that burn with the fires of hell, they are the hills of Cold Creek, where miners work and dwell. I work in the mines on Tuesday, I worked the day before. At 3 o'clock on Wednesday, I'll work in the mines no more. Shut up in the mines of Cold Creek, I know that But if we trust in Jesus, our souls to heaven will fly. Farewell, Father and Mother. Farewell, my wife and child. Shut up in the mines of Coal Creek. I know that we must die. The birds are gladly singing. The sun is shining bright. But where we are this evening, it is as dark as night. Shut up in the mines of Coal Creek. I know that we must die. But if we trust in Jesus, our souls to heaven will fly. Thank you much. I'll tell you a little something about that song. A Civil War general had gone through that area of Tennessee where Coal Creek was. I believe it was Fraterville, near Lake City now. And notice the coal seams came back and developed them in the 1880s. In the early 1890s, the coal operators hired convicts for pennies, and the miners revolted, and they had a battle or two. That's the origin of the Coal Creek March tunes, and I play a version of that. But in 1902, over 200 men and boys were trapped and died in the mine. They identified 184 of them. I believe Lake City has a website with this information. And they were trapped without air, but a lot of people were able to leave notes for their families. One man left notes for his family, and his 12-year-old son was with him. So you can read all that on the website. The same thing happened again in 1911, except that time it was around 80-some men and boys that died. But this song used to be sung around East Kentucky and East Tennessee.